It was just past 07:30 when I sat down at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee cooling in my hands. The morning light fell through the blinds in narrow stripes, laying across the oak surface where I had graded papers for decades. My house was quiet, the kind of stillness that sometimes feels like safety and sometimes feels like a weight. I opened my laptop, expecting nothing more than bills or the usual newsletters, and there it was. An email from Claire, my daughter. At first glance, I thought it was a travel update, maybe another photo from Paris, but as I read, the words blurred. It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't a request for advice or a note about her day. It was an announcement, a polished, almost corporate-sounding email that she was getting married in Paris this spring. There was no mom. I want you there. No space left for me to picture myself sitting among the guests. Instead, it was a tidy explanation that the ceremony would be intimate and small, and that she hoped I would understand. Understand? That single word tightened like a knot in my chest. After raising her, after nights of sewing costumes for school plays, after years of stretching paychecks to make sure she had everything she needed, I was now asked to understand why my presence at her wedding wasn't necessary. The screen glowed while my kitchen seemed to darken around me. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the tick of the old clock on the wall, even the rustle of my cat shifting on the windowsill. The world was steady, but inside me, something had slipped. I tried to remind myself of the ways love changes over time, how children grow up, move on, build lives with new people. But this felt different. This wasn't distance. This was erasure. A decision made somewhere between plane tickets and flower arrangements that left me on the outside of a moment that should have been shared. I folded my hands on the table, palms pressed flat, the way I used to when calming restless students. My throat ached, but no tears came. Instead, there was a hollow quiet, the kind of silence that rings louder than any shout. Memories flickered Claire in her prom dress, the two of us laughing as I tried to pin the hem, the mornings I braided her hair before school, the way she used to slip her hand into mine when crossing a street. All those small, invisible labors of motherhood replayed themselves in my mind, now cast against the reality that I would not be standing beside her on the most important day of her life. In that moment, I realized something I had tried not to name for years. I was no longer central, not in her choices, not in her story, not even in the image of her future. The realization settled heavy in my chest, as final as the click of the refrigerator door closing. And yet, as I sat there staring at the email, the thought pressed in quietly but firmly, if I could be erased so easily. Perhaps it was time to ask myself who I had become beyond being her mother. Morning routines have a way of stretching into whole lives if you're not careful. I wake up around 06:15 most days, not because I have anywhere urgent to be, but because the habit of rising early never left me after decades of working as a school principal. The house is always still, the kind of silence that feels different when no one else is expected to arrive. I feed my cat, Daisy, who weaves herself around my ankles with more urgency than anyone else in my life these days. Her meow is sharp, insistent, a reminder that at least one creature still depends on me. Breakfast is simple oatmeal, a cup of coffee. I sit at the same kitchen table where bills, report cards, and birthday cakes once rotated in seasons. The surface is worn smooth, a pale ghost of the life that used to happen around it. Some mornings, I set an extra mug on the counter without thinking, then tuck it away before the kettle whistles. Old muscle memory. After breakfast, I walk the neighborhood. Portland air is damp even on clear days, carrying the smell of moss and earth. I pass the fence where Claire once painted her name in pink bubble letters when she was 9. The letters are faded now, almost illegible, but I trace them with my eyes every time I pass, remembering how proud she was to leave her mark. Passers-by don't see them, but I do. That fence feels like my life, the traces are there. But no one looks closely anymore. Back home, I fold laundry that never seems to wear out because it's only ever me using it. I open the hall closet where an untouched quilt sits neatly folded, the quilt I sewed for Claire when she first moved to New York. She never took it. Too bulky, she said. I left it there, hoping one day she might want it. But it has become another quiet artifact of my invisibility. Days bleed together like this. Groceries, television reruns, phone calls that never quite come. I see the life Claire shares, online dinners with her fiancé's family, travel snapshots, gatherings where other women stand where I used to stand. Slowly, over years, I have been replaced. Not all at once, not cruelly, just replaced. And yet, it's not only about her choices, it's about mine. Somewhere along the way, I learned to make myself small so she could shine. And now, I've grown so used to that smallness that I can barely see myself in the mirror. Standing at the sink one evening, looking out at the yard while the sky went soft with twilight, I felt it rise in me, a restless stirring that whispered, this could not be all there was. Invisibility hadn't happened overnight, and change wouldn't either. But something had to shift. Something inside me had to wake up again. The morning after that restless twilight, I woke before the sun. The clock read 05:10, but I felt unusually alert, as though something inside me had decided sleep could wait. The air in the house was cool, hushed, the kind of stillness that carries possibility. I made tea instead of coffee, letting the warmth of the mug steady me as I sat at the kitchen table. For weeks, maybe years, I had been drifting in the shadows of my own life. But that morning, I reached for the drawer where I kept all the important papers, my estate folder, my savings accounts, insurance policies, all the things I used to glance at with a vague sense that I'd get around to them someday. I spread the documents out across the table, the paper edges overlapping like puzzle pieces. It struck me how much of my future was written here in signatures and balances, quietly waiting for me to notice. I saw the numbers in my accounts, not extraordinary, but steady enough to mean I wasn't powerless. Enough to remind me that I had choices. For the first time in a long while, I didn't look at those papers through the lens of what I owed to others. I looked at them as if they belonged to me, as if I could decide how to use them to honor my own life. There was a shift in me as I traced my finger over the lines of my will. I remembered how Claire had once insisted that everything be streamlined for her benefit, her voice persuasive, convincing me that simplicity was best. But staring at the words now, I realized that simplicity had really meant control hers, not mine. The quiet house seemed to echo with that realization. Daisy jumped onto the table, her tail brushing across the paperwork, as if to remind me this was mine, my decision, my responsibility. A calmness filled me then, not resignation, but resolve. I picked up a pen and began making notes in the margins, questions about adjustments, possibilities I wanted to explore. My handwriting felt steadier than it had in years. Each mark on the page was like reclaiming a part of myself I thought I'd lost. By 07:00, the sun had risen, painting the kitchen in pale gold. The papers were still spread out before me, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt clarity. I had spent so long mourning my invisibility that I'd forgotten I still had the power to choose how my story unfolded. I gathered the documents into a neat stack, placed them in my bag, and slipped on my coat. There was no grand announcement, no audience to watch me, just me, stepping into the day with purpose. My destination was clear. The bank opened at 09:00, and I intended to be there. For once, not as someone's mother, not as someone waiting to be invited in, but as myself, ready to take back the pen and write the next chapter. I thought the hardest part would be finding the courage to walk into the bank, but I was wrong. The hardest part was facing my own daughter afterward. It was a Tuesday evening when I told Claire about the changes I had begun to make. She had called me from her apartment, her voice brisk and efficient the way it always is now, full of schedules and obligations. I didn't tell her everything in detail, only that I had reviewed my estate and my accounts, and that I was moving some things around to reflect what felt right to me at this stage of life. For a moment, there was silence on the other end, the kind that carries weight, the kind that makes you brace yourself. And then the storm came. She didn't shout. Claire rarely shouts, but her words cut sharp and fast. She said it sounded reckless. She said I was being dramatic, letting emotions cloud practical judgment. She said I should have consulted her, since one day it would all fall to her anyway. That phrase, fall to her, settled like a stone in my chest. For her, my life's work, my savings, my home, were objects on a checklist waiting to be transferred. For me, they were fragments of a story, chapters of effort, pages filled with sacrifice. I let her speak, listening to the edge in her tone, feeling the ache of every word. When she softened for a moment, it wasn't tenderness, it was guilt dressed up as concern. She reminded me of everything she had on her plate: her career, her upcoming wedding, the life she was trying to build. She said she didn't have the time or energy to worry about me making rash decisions that could complicate things later. Her husband joined in too, his words more calculated. He framed it as financial wisdom, telling me I should think of stability, of streamlining. But what I heard beneath his calm suggestions was the same message: make it easy for us. Make yourself smaller. Stay predictable. Don't complicate the narrative we've already written for you. I can't pretend their words didn't sting. For years, I had been the steady hand, the quiet supporter, the one who filled in the gaps without being asked, to be spoken to as though I were a burden to manage, an obstacle to navigate, pulled something deep inside me taut. But instead of collapsing, I found myself standing straighter. I told them calmly, in my own words, that my life was not just a prelude to theirs, that I had every right to look at my own future and decide what mattered to me. My voice was steady, though my heart raced. I could almost hear their disbelief through the silence that followed. It hurt. Of course it hurt to feel their frustration, to see their disappointment. But beneath the hurt was something stronger: clarity. I was no longer making choices out of fear of being left behind. I was making them because I refused to abandon myself. That night, after the calls ended, I sat alone in my living room. The house was quiet, shadows stretching long against the walls. For the first time in years, I didn't feel crushed by that quiet. Instead, I felt rooted in it. I realized that being alone was not the same as being powerless. Yes, my daughter was angry. Yes, My son-in-law tried to press his will upon mine. But I had looked both of them in the eye, met their resistance, and not crumbled. The sting of their disapproval lingered, but it no longer frightened me. I whispered it out loud, just to hear the truth take shape in the room. I am no longer afraid of being alone. And strangely, the words did not sound like loss. They sounded like freedom. After the sharpness of Claire's words and the cold calculation of her husband's tone, I found myself questioning whether I had made a mistake. Alone in the quiet of my house, I replayed their arguments again and again. Doubt has a way of creeping in through the smallest cracks, and for a while, I let it. But life has a strange rhythm. It often brings light when you least expect it. That Friday evening, there was a soft knock at my door. My neighbor, Evelyn, stood there holding a pot of chicken soup. She said she'd made too much and thought I might want some. She didn't know about the argument or the sleepless nights. She only knew I was alone. That simple gesture felt heavier than any lecture about stability or planning. It reminded me that care doesn't always come from the people you expect. It sometimes arrives from across the street with steam rising from a ladle. A few days later, I met with a financial advisor at the bank. I had gone in bracing myself for the same dismissive tone I'd heard from Claire and her husband. Instead, the advisor sat with me patiently, explaining my options, answering my questions without condescension. She treated me not as a woman slipping into irrelevance, but as a capable adult making decisions about her own life. That respect felt like sunlight on cold skin. Even my old friend Marianne, who I hadn't seen in months, called unexpectedly. She said she'd been thinking of me and asked if I wanted to walk with her in the park. We strolled beneath maples turning red, and as we talked about our grown children, I felt less alone in my struggle. She admitted she, too, sometimes felt pushed aside, made to believe her years of giving were behind her instead of part of what made her strong. These moments were small, ordinary even. A pot of soup, a professional listening, a walk with a friend. Yet together, they became proof that invisibility was not the whole truth of my life. Some people still saw me. Some still valued what I had to say. The doubts didn't vanish entirely, but they softened. In their place grew something sturdier, a sense that I could weather whatever storm came next. I began to realize that while my daughter might see me as inconvenient, others still saw me as Harriet, a woman with her own worth. And that quiet recognition was enough to steady me for what I knew was coming: the wedding, the inheritance arguments, the final test of where my dignity would stand. The wedding day arrived, though not for me. I wasn't on a plane to Paris. I wasn't in a hotel room laying out a dress I had chosen carefully. I was in my living room, the television muted, my phone face down, the world outside moving as though nothing remarkable was happening. But in my chest, the weight was undeniable. My daughter was walking down an aisle, and I wasn't there to see it. I had imagined what it would be like countless times over the years, standing in the pews, holding back tears, seeing her smile with the kind of joy that only comes once in a lifetime. Instead, I sat by the window with Daisy curled on my lap, staring at the rain streaking down the glass. I let myself grieve what I had lost: the role of mother of the bride, the chance to be part of the story. That grief was real, and I didn't push it away. But grief wasn't the only companion that day. There was also a strange steadiness, born from the decisions I had made weeks before. I had shifted my estate, reshaped the will that once gave Claire everything by default. I had chosen to direct parts of it toward causes I cared about, to friends who had stood by me, and to my own peace of mind. I hadn't cut her out entirely, but I had rebalanced things so that my life's work wasn't treated as her entitlement. The storm broke soon after the wedding. Claire called, her voice sharp enough to slice through the distance between us. I could tell she had just learned about the changes, and it was as if the mask had fallen away. She wasn't the graceful bride in lace and pearls. She was a woman enraged, demanding explanations. She accused me of betrayal, of cruelty, of punishing her for living her own life. She said the wedding had been small because of costs, because of planning, because of logistics, but I heard the truth underneath. It had been small because she didn't want me there. And now, faced with the estate no longer guaranteed, she couldn't hide the entitlement she had carried all along. Every word stung. Of course it did. I'm still her mother, and no mother wants to be painted as the villain in her child's story. But beneath the sting, there was also a spark of vindication, because in her anger, Claire revealed exactly what I had feared, that I had been reduced to an asset, a resource, a piece of property to be managed. I spoke as calmly as I could, not to win her approval, but to claim my dignity. I told her that my choices were mine to make, and that I would not apologize for valuing my own worth. She tried guilt, she tried tears, she tried silence, but I no longer bent the way I used to. When the call ended, I sat quietly in my chair, the house once again still. Yes, my daughter was furious. Yes, the distance between us had widened, but I also knew something vital. I had chosen peace over approval. And for the first time in a long time, that peace felt like freedom. The sun was setting when I finally allowed myself to sit on the porch and breathe. The sky glowed in shades of gold and violet, the kind of quiet beauty that doesn't ask for applause. Daisy curled at my feet, purring softly, and for the first time in many weeks, I felt still, not empty, not erased, but grounded. Being excluded from my daughter's wedding had cut deeper than I wanted to admit. For days, I carried that wound like a shadow, asking myself what I had done wrong, wondering how love could grow so faint between us. But sitting there at dusk, I realized that erasure wasn't the whole story. I had been given a chance to choose myself again, to remember that my worth was not dependent on whether someone else acknowledged it. Yes, the betrayal hurt. Yes, the anger and guilt left bruises I'll carry for some time. But there was also dignity in standing up for myself, in refusing to be treated as a mere inheritance waiting to be claimed. Independence and love do not cancel each other out. They can coexist, but only if both sides respect the humanity of the other. I thought of Claire then, not with bitterness, but with a quiet wish that one day she might see me not as an obstacle or a resource, but simply as her mother, a woman who loved her fiercely and also learned to love herself. Perhaps that will take time. Perhaps it will never come. But my peace cannot be postponed, waiting on someone else's recognition. The evening air cooled around me, carrying the faint sound of children playing in the distance. It reminded me that life keeps moving forward, with or without permission, and in that moment, I felt grateful for neighbors who cared, for friends who listened, for the strength that rose in me when I thought I had none left. I share this story not to ask for pity, but to offer a reminder. If you've ever felt erased, if you've ever wondered whether your voice still matters, let me tell you it does. You are not invisible. You are not without power. Sometimes, the most radical act of love is choosing yourself. So tonight, as the last light fades from the sky, I invite you to reflect on your own story. Have you stood up for your dignity? Have you given yourself the same care you've poured into others? Share your thoughts. Share your stories. Because when we speak them out loud, we remind one another that none of us are truly alone.